The life insurance policy was sitting right there on the kitchen table, and my husband's name was listed as the sole beneficiary. But the policyholder wasn't me. I stood there holding a document I'd only opened because our financial advisor had emailed asking us to review our coverage before my husband's work benefits renewed in January. I thought I was doing us a favor. I thought I was being responsible. I set down my coffee, read the name on the policy again, and felt the floor tilt under me. The name on that document was a woman I'd never heard of. Not a relative. Not a colleague he'd mentioned. A complete stranger. And she had taken out a $2 million policy naming my husband as her beneficiary 3 years ago. 3 years. We've been married for 4. My name is Lee. Wait. No. That's not right either. I keep starting over because every time I begin, I feel the urge to explain myself, to justify why I didn't see this coming. But I'm done justifying. My name is Tierney Walsh. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist out of a clinic in Guelph, Ontario, and until the morning I found that policy tucked inside a manila envelope between our mortgage renewal papers and a Rogers bill, I genuinely believed I was in a happy marriage. My husband. I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, legally, technically, devastatingly, was a project manager for a civil engineering firm. He traveled a lot. That was just the nature of the job, he said. Hamilton 1 week, Kingston the next, sometimes Ottawa for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. I never questioned it because he always came home. He always texted. He was never cold, never distant, never gave me a reason to dig. The envelope wasn't hidden. That's the part that still gets me. It was just sitting there in the accordion folder we kept on top of the fridge, the one labeled House Finances. I'd gone in looking for our property tax confirmation, and there it was, sandwiched between documents like it belonged there. Like he'd forgotten it existed, or assumed I'd never looked twice at a piece of paper with someone else's name on it. But I looked twice, then 3 times. Then I sat down slowly on the kitchen floor, still in my scrubs, and read every line. The policy was issued by Sun Life. The premiums were set to auto-withdraw monthly from an account I didn't recognize. A TD account that wasn't our joint checking, wasn't his personal account I knew about. A third account. My stomach dropped so fast I actually pressed my hand to my chest to make sure I was still breathing. Her name was on the policy as the insured. My husband's name was in the beneficiary field, bold and clean and unmistakable. And the address listed for correspondence, I typed it into Google Maps right there on the kitchen floor, fingers shaking, was a townhouse in Kitchener, 40 minutes from our house. 40 minutes. I didn't call him. I don't know how I had the sense not to. But something in me went very quiet and very cold and said, "Not yet. Don't let him know you know." I put the envelope back exactly where I'd found it. I made myself eat something. I sat on the couch and watched a full episode of whatever show was already playing on the TV and retained absolutely none of it. And then I went to bed and lay there listening to the sound of the house and tried to understand what my life actually was. He came home the next evening at his normal time, a little after 6. He kissed me on the cheek. He asked what was for dinner. He poured himself a glass of water from the Brita, stood at the counter scrolling his phone, and talked about traffic on the 401. As though the world had not completely rearranged itself in the past 24 hours. I watched his hands, the way he set down the glass, the way he glanced, just once, toward the fridge. And I knew, with a certainty that lived in my body more than my mind, that he was checking, making sure the accordion folder was still there, that nothing had shifted. I smiled and told him I'd made pasta. That night I couldn't sleep. He fell asleep easily, the way he always did, and I lay beside him with my eyes open and thought about the shape of the last 4 years. Every business trip, every late call I'd taken at face value, every time he'd said Hamilton or Kingston and I'd nodded and gone back to whatever I was doing because I had no reason not to trust him. I was so careful not to be a suspicious wife. I've been proud of that. The next morning after he left, I called in a personal day. I told the clinic I wasn't feeling well, which was the truest thing I'd said out loud in 48 hours. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and started looking. The TD account was the first wall I hit. I couldn't access it, obviously, but I could look at our joint credit card statements, and I could look at the charges I'd noticed over the past couple of years and filed away without ever really examining. Gas stations in Kitchener, a restaurant in Waterloo I'd assumed was a work dinner, a Canadian Tire off Highway 8 that I had no memory of either of us visiting. I searched the address in Kitchener more carefully this time. Municipal property records are public in Ontario. The townhouse was registered in a woman's name. I'll call her the other woman, because naming her feels like giving her more space than she deserves in this particular story. And what happened to her is really a separate tragedy. I only understood later. She'd bought the townhouse 4 years ago, right around the time my husband and I got engaged. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about calling my mother. My mother is the kind of woman who would have driven to Guelph from Bari within the hour, sat across from me at the same kitchen table, and immediately started talking about what I should do. And I love her for that. But I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, because saying it out loud meant it was real, and some part of me was still hoping I'd find an explanation that made sense. A cousin I'd never met. An old family friend. Something. Instead, I drove to Kitchener. I don't know what I was expecting. I parked half a block down and sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, watching the townhouse. It looked ordinary. Beige siding, a small porch with a wreath on the door that I recognized as the kind they sell at Michael's every fall. A green recycling bin at the curb. It looked like anyone's house. Like my house. A woman came out while I was sitting there. She was maybe 35, in a winter coat, carrying a reusable grocery bag. She walked to the car in the driveway, a Mazda CX-5, silver, and got in and backed out without looking up. I didn't follow her. I wasn't ready for that yet either, but I wrote down her license plate. Back home, I did something I'd been telling myself not to do. I looked her up on social media. It didn't take long. Her profile was mostly private, but her profile photo was public, and so was her cover photo. A picture from what looked like a camping trip. Someone's arm around her shoulders, the frame cut off at the elbow. Whoever had been in that photo had been cropped out. Or she'd cropped them out, recently, carefully, like someone trying to clean something up. There was no picture of my husband on her profile. Of course there wasn't. But there was a comment on a post from 2 years ago. A photo of a sunrise she'd taken somewhere near Georgian Bay. And in the comments, one account, private, no profile photo, username that meant nothing, had written simply, breathtaking. The account had no followers, and followed no one. But I recognized the way my husband typed. No comma before and. The period outside the quotation marks. The unnecessary understatement. I'd read 4 years of his texts. I knew his written voice the way I knew his breathing beside me in the dark. I closed my laptop. My hands were completely still. I noticed that. The shaking had stopped, and something harder had moved into its place. I did not cry. I wanted to, I think, but it felt like the wrong time to be soft. I made a list. That's what I do when I don't know what to do. I make a list. I wrote down everything I knew. The policy, the account, the address, the plate number, the comment, the gas receipts. Then I opened a new page and wrote down everything I needed to know before I did anything else. The next morning, I called a family lawyer. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I found the name of the firm in Guelph through the Law Society of Ontario's referral directory. I didn't want to use anyone my husband knew through his professional network, and I didn't want to ask friends for recommendations because the moment I did, the story became theirs too. The lawyer I spoke with was direct and efficient, and did not once treat me like I was overreacting. She told me to document everything I'd found, and to do it quietly. She told me about equalization of net family property under Ontario's Family Law Act, and what I'd be entitled to, and she told me that if my husband had been making regular financial contributions to another household, rent, utilities, shared expenses, That could affect the division of our own assets. She also told me to open my own account at a different financial institution before I did anything else. I did that on my lunch break. The following week, I hired a private investigator. I found him through a firm in Hamilton that specialized in matrimonial investigations, something I had never in my life expected to Google. His rate was reasonable, and he was matter-of-fact about what I was asking, which I appreciated more than I can say. I gave him the license plate, the Kitchener address, and the dates of my husband's upcoming so-called work trips. I went home and I cooked dinner, and I sat across from my husband, and I asked about his day, and he told me. And I listened, and I thought, you have no idea. He was attentive that week actually, more attentive than usual, bringing home Tims for me in the mornings, suggesting we watch a movie together, asking if I wanted to drive to Hamilton on the weekend and walk along the waterfront. I said yes to all of it. I was warm and present and gave him nothing to read in my face. I had started to understand something that week. 4 years of living with someone teaches you their rhythms. He'd always been better at reading a room than most people, quick to notice if I was off, quick to deflect if something wasn't landing right. That skill cuts both ways. I'd spent years being transparent with him because I thought that was what intimacy looked like. Now I used everything I knew about how he watched people, and I gave him a version of me that was real enough to pass and blank enough to reveal nothing. The PI came back to me 10 days later. He'd followed my husband on 2 separate occasions. The first was a Tuesday when my husband had told me he was driving to Cambridge for a site meeting. He had driven to the townhouse in Kitchener instead and stayed for 4 hours. The second was a Thursday when I'd been at work. My husband had picked up groceries at a Loblaws in Kitchener. I saw the receipt in the report. Itemized, domestic, eggs and bread and laundry detergent, and driven them to the townhouse. He'd stayed overnight. The PI had photographs, time-stamped, clear, taken from a respectful distance but unambiguous. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my clinic and looked at those photos for a long time. I wasn't shocked. I'd stopped being shocked somewhere around the second week. But there's a difference between knowing something and seeing it confirmed in a set of printed photographs. And that difference lives in your chest in a way that's hard to describe. I scanned every document. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud folder. I made 3 copies on USB drives and kept one in my locker at work, sent one to my lawyer, and put one in the safe deposit box I'd quietly opened at the Scotiabank branch on Woolwich Street. I emailed my lawyer that evening with the investigator's report attached. Then I went home and made spaghetti and poured myself a glass of wine and let my husband tell me about his Thursday, while I smiled and said, at the right intervals. 2 days before I was ready to move, he came into the kitchen while I was doing dishes and stood behind me in that way he had, hands on the counter on either side of me, not quite touching, a performance of closeness, and said we should go on a trip. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while. Somewhere warm. Cuba, maybe, or the Dominican. Just the 2 of us. His voice was easy. Familiar. The voice he used when he wanted something to feel natural. I turned off the tap. I dried my hands on the dish towel. And I looked at his face and thought about a checklist with a title I never wanted to see again. I said that sounded lovely. I said I'd been needing a vacation too. He smiled and kissed me on the forehead and went back to the living room. I stood at the sink for another moment. My reflection in the dark window above the faucet looked steady. I looked at myself. On a Wednesday morning in February, I drove to my lawyer's office and signed the separation documents she prepared. The filing was already scheduled. My closest friend, someone I'd finally told the night before, sitting in her living room in Waterloo with a cup of tea gone cold in my hands, drove me and waited in the lobby. My husband came home that evening to find the documents on the kitchen table, the accordion folder open beside them, and the life insurance policy sitting on top. He called me 6 times in the first hour. I watched the phone screen light up from the passenger seat of my friend's car, parked outside her apartment. I didn't answer. My lawyer had told me I didn't have to, and she was right. The 7th call went to voicemail. I listened to it later. He said my name, then nothing for a long pause, then, "How long have you known?" I thought about texting back. I thought about all the things I could say, all the pointed, accurate, justly devastating things that had been collecting in me for 2 months. Instead, I put the phone down, looked out the window at the street, and thought about how quiet everything felt. Not empty. Quiet. The specific quiet of a decision already made and correctly made and done. My lawyer filed the next morning. The division of assets under Ontario family law was applied to the letter, including the financial audit that surfaced the third bank account, the one that had been paying into the Kitchener household for over 3 years. That discovery changed the scope of the proceedings considerably. He hired a lawyer. There were months of back and forth. I won't pretend it was easy or clean, because it wasn't. There were mornings I woke up at 3 a.m. and lay there in my friend's spare room staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation of the past 4 years the way you pick at something that won't heal right. There were days at the clinic where I went through 6 full appointments on autopilot, efficient and professional and completely hollow behind the eyes. But I didn't waver. I had the documents. I had the photographs. I had a lawyer who knew exactly what she was doing, and a judge who took financial concealment in a marriage very seriously under Ontario law. By spring, it was over. The settlement reflected what I was entitled to, plus interest on the marital assets that had been quietly redirected elsewhere. I kept the house. He vacated it in March. I stood in the empty living room the first morning it was only mine again, and opened every window even though it was only 4 degrees outside, just to change the air. My mother came down from Barrie that weekend. We didn't talk about him much. She brought her good cast iron pan and made us breakfast, and we sat at the kitchen table where none of this had started. And I was so glad to be there with her, I couldn't say it out loud without my voice going strange on me. I got a text from an unknown number about a month after the settlement. I almost didn't open it. It was from the woman in Kitchener. She said she hadn't known he was married. She said she'd found out around the same time I had, when she found a photo of us together saved under a contact name she hadn't recognized. She said she was sorry, and that she hoped I was okay. I sat with that text for 2 days. I thought about all the ways I could respond, and all the ways I didn't need to. I wrote back, "I believe you. I hope you're okay too." That was all. I've thought about this a lot since then, about how carefully he'd arranged things. 2 households 40 minutes apart, 2 women who each thought they knew the shape of their life. The life insurance policy, which I later understood was part of something he'd set up early in their relationship without her knowing the details. Just as there were things I'd never known the details of. Both of us, kept informed enough to feel secure, not informed enough to ask the right questions. And I think about how close I came to replacing that folder on top of the fridge, putting the property tax paper back where I found it, and walking away without reading the whole page. I'm glad I read the whole page. I'm glad I sat on the kitchen floor in my scrubs and didn't look away. I'm not the same person I was before that morning. I don't think I'm supposed to be. But I'm here in my own house with all the windows open when I want them open. And I know the difference now between trusting someone and simply never questioning them. Those are not the same thing. It took me 4 years and 1 wrong envelope to understand that. I won't forget it.